Hey, I've recently released the best DOS games by year according to MobyGames video, so I figured it's high time to give Amiga the same treatment. After all, most of my formative gaming years was spent on the Amiga. This time, however, instead of MobyGames, I'll use LemonAmiga website, which is, I feel, the best resource for the Amiga games info out there. So, same as with DOS, one game per year, chosen by the website's users, for as long as it has a minimum of 35 votes and no repeated games 2 years in a row if they only received minor updates. What I mean by that is that sensible World of Soccer will not appear as the top dog more than once. So, without further ado, let's see what were the best Amiga games. Defender of the Crown is Cinemaware's masterpiece, their most famous game and one that landed on most platforms. Also, an excellent choice for the best Amiga title of 1986, even if it was not a full feature-rich version as compared to others. Apparently, publishers were pushing Cinemaware to release early, or there was some money issues or something, I don't remember the exact details, but the result was that the Amiga version, so the original one, was released prematurely and unfinished. Not that it was broken in any way, but some small features were not in the game, even if they landed in other ports later on. Same as all other Cinemaware titles, though, Defender of the Crown is first and foremost a cinematic experience. It's made to lure you in and not let you go until you complete it. It's built out of various different game modes, all polished beyond belief presentation-wise, and put together to feel like a movie made out of numerous different scenes that you can partake in. It's a gaming magic. But if I had to explain what it is in a bit more detail, I'd say that Defender of the Crown is a mixed-genre Saxon Lord simulator, in which you would lead your chosen at the start ruler to victory, to conquer England. So, you can send your troops to fight for control over lands and in the same time personally participate in activities more suited to your status, like arcade playing jousting tournaments, which in itself are incredibly fun, or side-view sword fighting castle raids, or even slower-paced catapulting of enemy walls, aiming your shots and trying to down them as effectively as you can. In short, you are the future ruler of Britain. I've no doubt about that. You'll be building armies and attacking neighboring territories as much as managing your kingdom, running tournaments for influence and riches, and overall getting lost in this medieval fantasy. Whatever you want to say about Cinemaware, they could and they did easily had their audiences enchanted in the worlds they created. Mixing various gameplay styles with presentation fidelity, they served a juicy pie of entertainment that hardly anyone could walk by unimpressed. Don't let the superlatives fool you though, neither of the Defender of the Crown's building blocks was perfect, but they were all good and stitched together so well that they formed incredible experience for players with presentation that was unbeatable for quite some time. In 1986, a year before the famous A500 release, there weren't that many games dropped for the system overall, so by extension of that, also not many notable either. But 3 are definitely worth a mention. The Bard's Tale, Tales of the Unknown, a first in the series of first-person party turn-based fantasy role-playing games that quickly gained huge following thanks to its interesting story and addictive gameplay loop. Marble Madness, a creation of Mark Cerny, a father of modern PlayStation. This arcade gem sees you guiding a marble through obstacle course to the exit, alone or in simultaneous multiplayer, and Ultima 3 Exodus, last in the first trilogy of Ultima role-playing games taking place in Caesarea before it was renamed to Britannia in the future titles. As per usual, there's a big evil to defeat, and as per usual, you will succeed. While I always considered myself pretty well versed when it came to the Amiga, I've actually never played the game that took the cake for 1987, the Guild of Thieves, a text-based fantasy adventure game. Well, the text parser may have been the reason. Anyway, you play as an aspiring member of the infamous Guild of Thieves, and you're tasked with stealing any and all valuables that you'll find in and around the island castle. So, to do that and rise through the ranks of the guild, you'll have to complete series of increasingly more challenging heists, unravel the mysteries of the castle and outsmart your rivals. So you'll visit over 100 different locations around the castle, temple, labyrinth of caves and surrounding countryside. You'll engage in dialogues with multiple characters, collect items and solve numerous puzzles. And it's the puzzles that I keep reading about as being brilliantly thought through, and really enjoyable to solve and experience. Never being too difficult if you pay attention to the story, but also not too easy either. And there's a great variety of them, some more demanding than others and not solvable straight away, that may require figuring out of the simpler ones to unlock new locations where clues or items required to break the tougher may be found. The sheer number of items that you can find and collect within the game is just staggering. There's easily hundreds unique ones, and while all of them have their uses, not all are required for any of the puzzles. Guild of Thieves was a second game by Magnetic Scrolls after Prior the Pawn, and while they have nothing in common, they both take place in same fictional land of Karovnia. So there's that. Being a text adventure, you normally wouldn't expect much from the presentation, but apart from non-existent sound design, there's quite a few of actually pretty high-quality still images depicting various important to the plot locations. They're not animated, but are a nice touch nonetheless. I'm not big on text games, but if you are, then apparently this one's a gem among gems. Few other great games that landed on the Amiga in 1987 were Deja Vu: A Nightmare Comes True, a dark noir point-and-click adventure set in 1940s in Chicago, where you're a private eye who wakes up next to a dead body with a memory loss and a whole world turned against you, and you must figure out what really happened and prove your innocence. Earl Weaver Baseball, one of the most realistic and customizable baseball games to ever grace the home systems. Sport lovers claim that it was the best game of its kind in the 80s. I have no reason to dispute that. Leisure Suite Larry in the Land of Launch Lizards. First in a whole series of Sierras made grown-up adventure games telling a story of a loser Larry looking for love in all the wrong places, which coincidentally is also a title of one of the later outings. And at last, Ports of Call, a brilliant in its simplicity, multiplayer business management game where you run a fleet of freighters transporting cargo all around the world. There are some arcade elements in it that mainly but not only focus on docking and undocking from ports. Originally released in 1987 on Atari ST and a year later on the Amiga, Dungeon Master shook the world to its core. It redefined, perfected and standardized first-person dungeon crawling genre of RPGs. It was the first title to really popularize real-time combat in RPGs using this perspective, and also chose having party members' skills grow and upgrade by using them rather than basing their effectiveness on an abstract experience points and levels. Additionally, Dungeon Master introduced direct object and items manipulation via mouse on main view screen, meaning switches could be toggled, items picked and dropped, all in the very same window enemies, dungeon and everything else was displayed in. It may seem like nothing today, but back then it was a milestone for the genre. Magic was performed using certain combinations of runes, which while novel was never really my cup of tea. And if I had to name one thing I didn't like about the game, this would be it. For the sheer annoyance that it cost me. I mean, I wanna play the game, not learn numerous combinations of abstract symbols. Whatever. At the beginning of the adventure, a player can resurrect up to 4 warriors to form a team, preferably choosing classes that complement each other, and then lead them through the dungeon to recover Grey Lord's fire staff that is to be used to destroy the Scourge in the form of Lord Chaos, a villain of the game. Amiga Sport didn't improve on Atari's original in any meaningful way, but frankly speaking there wasn't much to improve on. Dungeon Master was as good as it could have been in its first outing, and so it was on the Yami. And while other future titles may have improved on the formulas it introduced, there can only be the one first, and Dungeon Master was it. Bubble Bobble was at the time of its release the most fun, hands-down best single-screen platformer that quickly propagated from within the cigarette smoke-filled arcades to home systems of all kinds and power budgets. And that music, oh my days! Elite. David Braben and Ian Bell's Impossible Made Possible. A whole universe of gameplay on one disc. You could trade, fight and live in a single floppy worth of space forever. The Great Giana Sisters. Another one of those impossibilities. This time Super Mario Bros. On C64 and then Amiga. Which Giana Sister was, until it wasn't. Cause Nintendo decided to double slap the idea out of developers' heads with a perfectly launched cease and desist attack. Hybris was an incredibly playable arcade-like Amiga exclusive shoot-em-up experience that not only featured tons of levels, weapons and bosses, but most importantly was hella fun. Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders, an incredible sci-fi team to humor-filled point-and-click adventure game that was many gamers' first title in a genre and one that shaped their future gaming habits. Cinemaware's It Came From the Desert is considered their best game by many, and it's a pulpy B-movie interactive horror adventure set in Lizard Breath, small fictional desert town in California. And you play as Dr. Greg Bradley, who came to a town to study a mysterious meteor crash site. As you do that, you'll quickly learn that the radiation spreading from the meteor has mutated and enlarged a local ant population. From that moment onward, you'll have 15 days to find evidence of huge ants' existence, to convince the locals and authorities that the ants need to be contained or will end up spreading uncontrollably, and they'll eventually take over more than just a backwater town. To win, in a literal meaning of the word, you'll have to locate and terminate the Ant Queen. Sounds simple, right? It's not though. And the game is known for being brutally difficult to complete. Unlike other Cinemaware's titles, It Came From the Desert is real-time, meaning the game time progresses constantly when running, regardless if you do something or not. It introduced interesting mechanic where when your character should have died of something, whatever it might be, he wakes up in a hospital instead and some of the precious time has passed, which considerably raises the difficulty of completing your objectives in time. Technically speaking, the game is divided into two modes. One being a classical adventure, where most of your time is spent and the story progresses at its own pace, and minigames that work as a sort of solution to various events that are triggered in the adventure mode. It's a unique title and a crowning jewel in Cinemaware's small but excellent game library. It's also one of the few titles used back in the late 80s and early 90s to telegraph Amiga's graphical superiority when compared to PC games, something I'm afraid that did not last for very long. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is an incredible adventure as good as the movies, which the developer LucasArts spared no efforts on and made to entertain any video game fans and not just indie fanatics. Battle Squadron, a spiritual successor to Hybris and a top-down vertically scrolling shooter, that this time, thanks to its quality, is not an exclusive anymore, easily one of the best Amiga shoot-em-ups. Laser Squad, Julian Golub's turn-based tactical masterpiece and a title that fathered future UFO, also by the legendary developer. Lost Dutchman Mine. If you ever wondered how would it be to live in the Wild West looking for gold, wonder no more. This game got you covered. Maniac Mansion, Ron Gilbert's first title to use Scum Engine, huge hit and one of the best point-and-click adventure games ever made. Sandy was kidnapped by evil Dr. Fred and you as Dave and two other friends have to infiltrate his scary mansion to save her. It's a classic. North and South, a strategy arcade mixture that's universally beloved by all C64 and Amiga gamers, yours truly excluded. Hard to say why, I just never fell for it. SimCity. Spawned by a coincidence, starting as a tool for map making for another game, SimCity became an instant hit and a cultural phenomenon for years to come. It also made Will Bright a household name, so there's that. Starflight, a non-linear space opera role-playing with unprecedented depth, space exploration, combat, trading and a captivating plot. Stunt Car Racer, exactly what it's called. There's a car, there's the track full of jumps, ramps and such, and you race. So yeah, it. Ice cream, I'm Batman. Shut up, brutes, or I'll lock you in the closet again. Speedball 2 Brutal Deluxe is easily not only one of the most well-known cult classics, but also best sports games on the Amiga. And it's not even a real sport. I mean, it's as much of a sport as competitive nose-picking is. And Manbat seems to have major in it. The shit's sticking from everywhere. He just picks and wipes it on anything. It's awful. Anyway, Speedball 2 is a mixture of handball with ice hockey that rewards fast, violent and aggressive play rather than slower and more measured approach to it. From the moment you launch it, it's clear that it draws inspirations from 1975's movie The Rollerball, which is not bad as it's also a classic. The game is played by two teams of 9 players as opposed to 5 in previous title, on an enclosed pitch with a goal at each end. And the goal, excuse me the pun, is to amass the most points possible throughout the whole match. Goals are worth 10 points initially, but that can be raised with multipliers to 15 or even 20. There are also targets on the side of the court that reward bonus points, and you naturally also get points for injuring opposing players. Fun. Each match lasts 180 seconds and there are 5 different game modes available: Knockout, Cup, League, Practice and Multiplayer. It goes without saying that the most fun in Speedball 2 comes from couch versus multiplayer, where you compete against your real-life friends. Or enemies. I'm not the one to tell you who to spend your time with. In single player, between matches you can spend silver tokens collected during gameplay on improving your players and on purchasing newer, better ones. And since the ones you start with are limited in how far they can be improved upon, in time most will be replaced if you play your cards and matches right. In the end, Speedball 2 was a huge success and has a cult following to this day, with some people swearing that it was their most favorite sports game and some even saying that it is still to this very day. Golden Axe on the Amiga is easily the best port of the arcade beat-em-up classic out of all home systems it landed on, maybe short of Sega Genesis. The whole arcade game is here and it's as good as always. Panzer Kickboxing, the most technical, most skill-reliant and least explosive and flashy in its design versus fighter on the Amiga. Also, in my opinion, the best game in the genre on a system. Pang on the Amiga is amazing. It's easily one-to-one conversion from the arcades and still allows for 2-player balloon-popping action like no other. It's great. Pool of Radiance is a legendary first-person perspective AD&D fantasy role-playing with tactical turn-based combat. In search for riches and glory, you enlist to save City of Flan and its surrounding areas from monsters. Prince of Persia, a beloved action platformer famous for its rotoscoped graphics, unforgiving 60-minute timer and addictive gameplay loop. If you had an Amiga, you had Prince of Persia. Fact. Rick Dangerous, an Indiana Jones wannabe, not even a doctor, and whipless hero that sets off to search for treasures, big and small, in this memorization single-screen arcade platformer. Silent Service 2, arguably the very best submarine simulation on the Amiga, because it's not too spreadsheety and not too arcadey, it's just a perfect mix of both. Sid Meier's Pirates, as good as Civilization and yet entirely different hit of a game by the same legendary designer who leased his name to it. In short, you get to live your best imagined pirate life in the Caribbean, either swashbuckling, stealing and killing, or less piratey, trading and questing, trying to find your long-lost family along the way. Wings of Fury, a game without which Jet Strike would never be, but also a side-scrolling action shooter that originated on the Apple II. "1990 was a year of the monkey, and not only on PC as we learned in the last video, but also on the Amiga. Actually, scratch that. I'm not familiar with Chinese astrology, so you might have not been, but it kinda was anyway. Because LemonAmiga users picked Secret of the Monkey Island as the best game of the year, same as Moby Games users did. And good, cause it is by far the best point-and-click adventure of the early 90s, in my opinion. And I will defend that notion for as long as I can, or have to. There were games released before, in the same time and after. None came close to this brilliant gem. And I feel that short of much newer Life is Strange Before the Storm and Detroit Become Human titles, Monkey Island is still the best adventure game on any of the systems to date, although entirely different to the newer three I just mentioned. Ron Gilbert is the iconic mastermind behind Monkey's incredible story, and truth be told, most other early Lucasfilm adventure games too. Secret of the Monkey Island places you in the shoes of Guybrush Threepwood, a young pirate wannabe, and he will do anything to become one. Cause you know, follow your dreams, don't give up on them, aim for the target, be the best, blah blah blah, blah blah blah. That's why. So, he sets out on an adventure that will see him completing series of challenging and often hilarious pirate trials, finding love of his life in definitely least expected place, and fighting against the terrifying ghost pirate LeChuck, who seems to be suffering from a constant constipation judging by how he behaves. The game is filled with humor to the brim, so much so that it's leaking to all the aspects of gameplay, so most puzzles are based on funny interactions either between characters or objects. Your tasks/adventures are just out of this world, and situations you'll find yourself in are just comedy magic. Like the now famous sword fighting scene, for instance, where you have to defeat the Great Sword Master, seemingly deadly and undefeated. But unless you played the game before, you wouldn't know going for it that it's not your typical battle of strength and dexterity, but rather a challenge of witty remarks. Monkey Island looks great, it sounds incredible, I mean the title tune is an instant earworm, and on top of that it's incredibly atmospheric and has an amazing and captivating laughs-filled plot. If you never played it, pause this video and do so, it's worth it. While 1991 was easily won by the Monkey by an overwhelming number of points I must add, it was also a year that featured dozens of incredible releases, among which were arguably three best in their own respective subgenres races on the Amiga: a simulation, a top-down racer, and a third person from behind the car one. So in the respective order, Formula 1 Grand Prix was Geoff's Cramon's goodbye title for the Amiga, a Formula 1 simulation that had no real competition on the system, at least none that could hold candle to it. Then there was Supercars 2. Saying that it was a progenitor to Death Rally may be far-fetched, but if you think about it, it's not that far off either. It's a 1 or 2 player racer with a variety of upgrades and weapons to use while speeding. And Lotus Turbo Challenge 2, Amiga's answer to Turbo Outrun, arguably much better game on the system, a middle of the trilogy, and the very best out of all Amiga arcade racers, especially that up to 4 players could challenge each other if 2 systems were connected. Alien Breed, first in the series of beloved Amiga top-down shooters, spiritual successor to Gauntlet, thematically heavy borrowing from the Alien series of movies. Battle Isle, sci-fi top-down turn-based hex grid strategy that put Blue Byte, the developer, on a list of who's who in game design, and stole hearts of players with sheer number of units, quality of gameplay and deep strategic layer. Centurion Defender of Rome. I like to think of it as the first ever Total War game. In essence, it's just that. An ancient grand strategy with tactical real-time battles. Another World, a cult classic cinematic adventure platformer with captivating sci-fi plot, incredibly smooth animations and hella addictive gameplay. King's Bounty, a turn-based single-player fantasy strategy with some heavy role-playing overtones that in time evolved into a universally beloved multiplayer gem known as Heroes of Might and Magic. Megalomania, a top-down real-time strategy in which you compete against 3 others through the ages from ancient to the future. Moonstone A Hard Day's Night is a fantasy-themed multiplayer role-playing board game real-time brawler mixture that's in my eyes one of the better party games to grace our home systems. Yes, party games. Populous 2 – Trials of the Olympian Gods. Peter Molyneux's take on the real-time strategy god game, where you must challenge a whole pantheon of Greek gods. Rick Dangerous 2 – a second game in Souls-like memorization platformer series where you play as Rick, an Indiana Jones-like adventurer, and yes, I know what I said. Roadland – incredible single-screen over-the-top cute platformer for 1 or 2 players that I consider to be better than Bubble Bobble. I know, sin, but whatever. Lemmings, the game that shook the world and turned those that did not care about puzzle games into the genre with one sweep move. Or 1,000 tiny moves, I should say really. One after another, straight into inevitable death. And finally, Turrican 2, The Final Fight. The second and arguably best in a series of Manfred Trent's Metroidvania-like games that mix exploration platforming with fast and furious bullet hell shooting. It's great. Drumroll please. If you hear one, then Menbat's getting a dinner tonight. If not, then, well, there'll be a punishment. Monkey Island 2 LeChuck's Revenge is second outing in the Monkey series, and while perhaps it's not as influential as the first title was, it's still nearly as good, and one of the very best point-and-click adventure games ever released. Period. Once again, you're Guybrush Threepwood, who's finally a pirate, so there's that. Perhaps one that other pirates laugh at, often right in his face, but a pirate nonetheless. And this time, you're on a quest to find the Big Whoop, a legendary treasure that's said to be bigger, better, more elusive and treasurier than all the riches of the richest. Yep, one of those is not a word. Who cares? Anyway, I'm sure that the title gave it away, but once more you'll face the evil LeChuck, this time zombified, brought back to life as an undead by his subordinates. Many things have been improved since the last game, from graphics that have a bit more animated movie look to them, featuring beautiful hand-painted backgrounds and more detailed character sprites, through LucasArts' new iMuse system synchronizing music to the action on the screen, all the way to the modernization of the interface and more cinematic feel to the adventure. The traditional for the series swashbuckling comedy atmosphere is omnipresent and will keep you laughing from start to finish, chuckling at funny jabs in the dialogues or unexpected interactions between the characters. Monkey Island 2, same as its predecessor, is not just a game. It's an experience that all gamers, regardless of what their fave genres are, should dive into at least once. It's worth it. I feel that I'm saying that it's worth it every time I mention Monkey Island. It's gotta be worth it then, right? Right. 4D Sports Driving, aka Stunts, is a 3D racing simulation with an emphasis on the stunt tracks and hitting the best lap times. I played it to death as a kid and it was great. Apidia, an insect-themed horizontally scrolling shooter in vein of R-Type, as difficult, more varied and a fun game if you're skilled at this. Dune. Not the Dune you think of, but its predecessor. A first-person strategy adventure mix unlike any other, based on Frank Herbert's book and visually inspired by the 1994 movie. Flashback. Many thought of it as a sequel to Another World, when in fact it was its own sci-fi themed super smoothly animated action platformer. Great title. Historyline 1914-1918. Basically Battle Isle we spoke of a few minutes ago, but in World War I setting. Really addicting if you're a tactical combat WWI nut. Might and Magic 3 The Isles of Terra, the last and best Might and Magic game on the Amiga. A party-based role-playing of gigantic proportions and a classic of the genre. Pinball Fantasies. The absolute best 2D pinball ever made. Prove me wrong. Or don't, I don't care, it's the best. All 4 tables are fantastic and the gameplay is the bomb. Sid Meier's Civilization. The game that single-handedly created a historically accurate offshoot of 4X, allowing you to simulate your nation from ancient times through all eras to the future. It changed gaming forever, spawning new entries into the series every few years or so ever since. Sensible Soccer. Some say it's the best football on the Amiga. All I'll say is that it will have the top spot in one of the later years in its world version. Shadow of the Beast 3. Best playing and worst looking out of all Beast games. Still a graphical benchmark for all the other action platformers to compare to. Dune 2, The Battle of Arrakis, also known as The Building of a Dynasty, is based on Frank Herbert's book Dune and takes place on the planet Arrakis, the only place in the universe known to house spice deposits, a resource crucial for interstellar travel and by extension of that the most precious and expensive one in the whole galactic empire. The Emperor has invited 3 powerful houses, Harkonnen, Artidis and Ordos, to compete against each other in spice extraction and bring up its production considerably. Very quickly, however, the houses turned to violence and military competition, and if not for the Emperor, it would have definitely escalated to an all-out war. If that wasn't enough, the planet itself is hostile too, as it's a habitat of a gigantic and near indestructible sandworms, and while they can be in most cases avoided, when they attack, they're deadly, as they can literally swallow units whole. Scary stuff. Even though the game is based thematically on the book and borrows from the source material in heaps, its story and gameplay has very little to do with either the book or the movie. While Dune 2, The Battle for Arrakis may have not been the very first RTS, it's universally considered to be the first modern RTS, a progenitor of the genre, and a title that defined most of the staple RTS characteristics that we know and see in games even today. Things like gathering and processing of resources, and the use of said resources to build structures and train units. Point-and-click command input for armies, and the need to protect the gatherers, as they're crucial for progress while being fragile and powerless in direct combat at the same time. And finally, the circle of power, meaning that each unit had a weakness that other unit could exploit. So knowledge of your army's composition was a key to success. It's a great and enjoyable title that did not age well, sadly. Some design choices are clearly outdated by now, for instance the fact that you can't control more than one unit at the time. Nonetheless, despite my complete indifference towards it, cause yeah, I'm not really a fan, Dune 2 is one of the most important games in history, and as such, it being chosen as the best Amiga game for 1993 on LemonAmiga is understandable. Canon fodder proves that war indeed has never been so much fun, and it's a top-down mouse-driven team-based shooter. My most favorite and action-packed game in its subgenre to this very day. A bit difficult though. Chaos Engine is probably the best cooperative top-down shooter created for any of the 16-bit systems. Its maze-like design, steampunk-inspired aesthetics, and a lot of explosive action guarantee a fun afternoon with a buddy. Frontier Elite 2 is not only a technological marvel, serving the biggest explorable universe and a game world until the release of Elite Dangerous few years back, but it's also a space lover's wet dream, where you can work for military, space navy, private companies or yourself. You can become a trader, smuggler and a pirate, or anything in between. The possibilities are endless. It's the best. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, a game that should have been a fourth movie about Indy. Incredible adventure that will take him and his friend Sophia on a crazy ride all around the world to find the long-lost continent. Lemmings 2: The Tribes, a final and ultimate version of the Lemmings, much better than the Lemmings 3 that came few years later, not as innovative as the original though. The Lost Vikings, a unique puzzle platformer in which you must lead 3 differently skilled Viking warriors home, through different worlds and dimensions. Project X Special Edition is Team 17's take on R-type-like horizontally scrolling shooter, and for the time pretty decent Amiga exclusive. The Settlers was one of the best, most innovative and fun two-player fantasy nation/kingdom builders that you could play with a friend on the same system. Also, the cute little workers building everything in real time brick by brick and plank by plank were just mind-bogglingly detailed for the time. I could watch it for hours. Super Frog. Our hero turned frog, well, Super Frog, has to save his beloved from the claws of an evil witch. It's the best Amiga platformer in my eyes, full of hidden passages, secrets, caches of treasures and hours of fun. Yo Joe, an unusual action platformer that allowed 2 players to play simultaneously on the same system. It's not something that was often seen in the genre, also a pretty fun game on its own too. Despite that it was not my most favorite footy on the Amiga, looking back at it now, I agree that Sensible World of Soccer was the absolute #1 football game on the system. I think the best testament to that would be the fact that the real-world tournaments, while not as common as in the 90s, are still being held in it, and some fans even take upon themselves to update the team rosters. It's just incredible that a nearly 30-year-old game can have such a grasp on its fanbase. But it's not for no reason. It's not only one of the most accessible football games of the time, but it actually plays really well. And since the graphics use couple of pixels in size players, you always get to see a pretty large chunk of the pitch, which allows for easier planning and pulling off of difficult set pieces, and just makes the whole experience fun and very rewarding. Even more so when there's more gamers involved and you're playing in a league or tournament. Sensible World of Soccer also offered very enjoyable, even if overly simplistic management mode, where you could not only play the games but also lead your team to victory without taking active part in the matches. And that's the mode I played the most, as quite honestly I seriously sucked at playing the game itself. Let's say that I've spent more time losing the ball I was running with, without the interference of the opponents I might add, than actually trying to score. And I really don't know why, as most of my friends were pretty good at it. Perhaps I'm just not built for sports games. Anyway, every Amiga fan should try it out, whether they enjoy the sport or not, as it's very charming and hella fun. Unless you're me, then just ignore that last sentence. Alien Breed Tower Assault is the best out of all 2D Alien Breed games and culminates on everything that the previous titles did well. It's the most playable of them all and probably the best gauntlet-like game on the system. Arcade Pool. I'm gonna be honest with you here. It was not an important title in any shape or form, but it was my most favorite pool game on the Amiga, so I decided to add it anyway. Benefactor. The hidden gem among hidden gems, incredibly playable and smart puzzle platformer that's partly Lemmings, partly something else, but totally fun. It's a tough one though, so keep that in mind as it will test both your mind and dexterity. The clue is incredibly ingenious adventure strategy mixture in which you play as a thief who starts off his career with small heists and works his way up to the theft of crown jewels. All heists are very strategic, so you have to scout the target first, learn of it, then buy gear, hire accomplices and then plan it step by step. Dreamweb. A top-down dark noir futuristic adventure game made strictly for grown-ups. It's brutal, it's bloody, and it will put your moral compass into question. It's incredible. Fury of the Fairies is one of the best puzzle platformers of all time. You have 4 fairies to control, one can swim and shoot bubbles, one has a line and a grappling hook, one shoots fireballs, and one bites. Yes, bites. Using their skills you have to solve increasingly more challenging stages. Oh, and there are literally dozens of hidden areas and levels in the game, so keep your eyes open. Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. Funny enough, both came out in the same year on the Amiga, and they both were incredible ports for the seriously underpowered as compared to arcade's system. They were fast, bloody and hella playable. First, more alone in single player, second, against a friend. That said, both tested your patience with incredibly annoying disc juggling. Banshee, one of the most beloved vertically scrolling shoot-em-ups for bigger Amiga owners as it required AGA chipset. It's fun, but I prefer others. Rough and Tumble. The most console-like in its quality, design and polish action platformer / shooter on the Amiga. It looks like something that shouldn't have been possible on the system, and yet somehow it still is, and plays like a charm. Super Stardust is the ultimate take on the asteroids. It looks incredible with its pre-rendered graphics and features plenty of power-ups, different hazards, and even between the levels pseudo-3D tunnel sections. Theme Park. One of the most unique 16-bit business simulations, chock full of humor and yet still running on a surprisingly deep financial engine that powers this little amusement park building gem. UFO Enemy Unknown is one of the most important games of all time, and a start to the series that I still play to this day, albeit in newer, modern outings of XCOM and XCOM 2 by Firaxis. It's a mixture of grand strategy with tactical combat encounters and base management. Explosive mixture that delivers a lot of fun given its run on appropriately fast system. Today, UFO is probably best played using either Steam or GOG versions rather than on the Amiga, as they run excellent on any piece of hardware from the last 20 years and can be enjoyed on even the potatoest of machines. Though that said, if you emulate your Amiga and don't play on real hardware, then Amiga's version is pretty good too, provided it's run off the hard disk that is. Anyway, the game as mentioned initially is a mixture of genres, so you have your strategic layer where you're seeing a globe in its full glory and can build bases, detect alien ships and bases, and in turn command your ships to either shoot the enemy down or take your troops to mission sites. Then there's the management bit, where you're in full control of your base's design and expansion, adding rooms as needed, each with its unique properties. You can hire soldiers, scientists and engineers, research, manufacture and arm both your units and ships. Arguably, outside of missions, this is where you'll spend most of your time. And finally, a tactical layer, where you take your team to tackle the alien forces on the ground. It's what you'll easily be doing the most of, controlling all your units individually in turn-based, very atmospheric, extremely difficult and rewarding combat. And even though it's played in turns, whomever played the UFO can confirm that it couldn't have felt any more action-packed. Because while it's not real-time per se, it's definitely blood pressure-raising, terrifying experience where you constantly face overwhelmingly stronger and working with higher quality gear deadly foes. It's an experience like no other. By 1995, even Team 17 wanted to jump on the Dune bandwagon, and they did, with Alien Breed 3D dressed in their earlier 2D series as clothing. Despite some technical limitations, it actually plays really well and looks decent provided you have a beefy enough system to run it. Deluxe Galaga, the best shooter on the Amiga, period. There's no competition. I know, it looks simple, but there's such a huge and ingenious game underneath the basic presentation you wouldn't believe. Also a progenitor to the best known 3D shooter on PC, Warblade. Lost in Mine, an obscure but incredibly smart and playable puzzle platformer that's a mixture of Lemmings and Benefactor, at least on the first glance. What's important is that it plays well. Some swear that Body Blows games were great, but I don't subscribe to this notion. Shadow Fighter, in my eyes, is the very first serious attempt at Amiga's own Street Fighter, and a really fun game at that, with many different characters that all have their own unique special moves. Colonization. A civilization, but in the reduced to colonization of North America era and focusing more on trade and development rather than combat, at least for the major part of the game. Ultimate Soccer Manager. Some might say that there are better managers out there, but this one was an ideal package. It looked great, played great, and was not overly difficult or convoluted in its submenus for the new player to hop in and enjoy it from the get-go. And finally, Worms. I don't think I have to explain Worms to anyone. It's that scorched earth/artillery-like game with dozens of weapons and cute worms that took over the world and spawned countless sequels. Slamtilt may have not been the best pinball game on the Amiga, at least to me, but it was definitely in the top 3, and LemonAmiga users' best game pick for 1996. That said, I'm sure I've angered some of my Amiga viewers by placing it as one of, and not the best game. But I feel that the best 3 can be used interchangeably depending on your mood, as they all have very unique tables to them. Anyway, those who had AGA Amigas often claimed that Slamtilt was the ultimate game in the genre. I always found my pinball fantasies to be a better fit for my flipper needs. But that's me, and whatever my personal feelings are, Slamtilt is excellent at everything it does. The graphics, which are beautiful AGA 256 colors, seem to blend all the table's elements, ramps, bumpers, flippers smoothly together, forming perhaps not photorealistic but a very coherent nonetheless depiction of a real thing. The sounds are fantastic, probably the best on the system. This I will not dispute, they just shine. All elements sound like you expect them to, as if they were recorded straight out of the arcade cabinet in a professional sound studio. The tables themselves are great too. There's 4 of them: Mean Machines, The Pirate, Ace of Spades and Knight of the Demons. And they're all amazing. Designed to perfection with as much attention to detail of their presentation and decoration as there was to their gameplay. I can honestly say that while all the tables are not made the same, and there are obviously those that are a bit better, like the Pirate and NOTD, all are super fun to play, and all feature numerous extra minigames to ramp up those scores through the roof. I've left the best for last though, and it's ball physics. Pinball Fantasy's ball physics, while not bad, was nothing to write home about, and sometimes appear pretty artificial when compared to modern games like FX Pinball for instance. Slamtilt's physics are marvelous. They're no different to what we expect from games today, and feel as realistic as I believe it to be possible outside of the real pinball cabinet. There is only limited number of things that you can say about pinball games without going too in-depth about specific gameplay bonuses and strategies, so I'm not gonna milk Slamtilt anymore, and would just like to highlight once more that the most important thing about it is that it's great. If you don't have a pinball game on your Amiga or are looking for a new one, this one's among the very best and well worth every minute spent at it. Gloom Deluxe was my favorite Amiga 3D FPS game. It wasn't the best, mind you, it was just the best combination of hardware requirements, levels and enemies design, weapons and most importantly fun. So while you could find other, better in their respective areas, this was a whole package. Fighting Spirit is the best original and not ported from the arcades versus fighting game on the Amiga, period. This one, however, looks more like an SNK game rather than one from Capcom, but it plays incredibly and, believe it or not, works on all Amiga models provided they have at least 1 MB of RAM. While Mega Typhoon may have not been the best vertically scrolling shooter on the system, it's definitely within the top titles in the genre. It looks and sounds stellar and offers bullet hell action like hardly any other. I find it interesting that other than the Monkey Island titles, all games are entirely different than those that were considered best for DOS. Even though most of the years both platforms received rather mirrored releases short of some exclusives here and there. And to be honest, I think I like Amiga's choices better. They are more varied and cover more genres. But what do you think about them? Do you agree with any of the picks, or the Vox Populi does not do the justice to a list like that? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running, and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.